Okay, so I will show you a state-of-the-art summary presentation on DP4 inhibitors, and there are certain concepts which you need to imbibe. Just let us see them quickly, and we may discuss any one of those concepts which you don't understand. Okay, is that okay?
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now all of you mute your mics. Then, so DP4 inhibitors, choosing the gliptins in diabetes is an important aspect. So there is important thing is there is a paradigm shift in the understanding of the etiology or the pathogenesis of diabetes. Paradigm shift in the treatment, incretins and DPP4s, pharmacological profile, clinical profile of gliptins, safety, choice of gliptins as OHA, summary and conclusions. So what is the paradigm shift in the understanding of the pathogenesis or the causation of diabetes? So when we were students, this much only we know. Diabetes is due to deficiency of insulin. This is the only answer we have. After that came the triumvirate model. There are three causes. One, insulin resistance. Two, the insulin deficiency. And three, probably the liver is the cause, hepatic glucose production. Now we are having omnious octet. And research is going on. This might become 12 in the near future. So as of now, there are 8 different mechanisms for pathogenesis of diabetes. Look here, first of all, what we thought was the insulin secretion was the first defective. Beta cell insulin secretion is defective, that is why hyperglycemia. Peripheral utilization of glucose is defective, that is why there is hyperglycemia. And then hepatic glucose uptake is the cause for hyperglycemia. This is called the triumvirate model, three causes of pathogenesis of diabetes. This was in vogue for a long time. From the univariate or the insulin deficiency model in 1950s, 60s, and 70s, there came the triumvirate model, insulin deficiency, glucose uptake in the peripheral level, and the hepatic glucose output. So these are the three causes of hyperglycemia. Then came the role of alpha cells of the pancreas. Postprandial glucagon secretion is found to cause glucagon is a hyperglycemic enzyme, hormone. So naturally it produces hyperglycemia. Now we have got 1, 2, 3, and 4 reasons for this one. Later on came the free fatty acid and lipotoxicity from the adipose tissue. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are the 5? Beta cell dysfunction, decreased insulin production, alpha cell stimulation, and glucagon increased production, causing hyperglycemia from the pancreas. Peripheral utilization of glucose in the muscle, causing hyperglycemia. This is decreased, and hyperglycemia. Hepatic glucose output is increased, hyperglycemia. And the adipose tissue, free fatty acids are increased, lipotoxicity is there, and that causes hyperglycemia. This is the 3, 2 plus 2 plus 4, 5 pentavirate model. Then we had now the incretins, the gut in related hormones causing hyperglycemia in the absence of the messenger from the gut to stimulate the insulin. We know that people are getting into hyperglycemia. That is where the today's discussion has come. 6 reasons. Now have come the altered glucose resorption at the kidney level, which we have discussed last week about the SGLT inhibitors. This is the 7 different mechanisms. Now came the 8th one, altered hypothalamic appetite control, and probably the appetite control center is in a way affected, and satiety is reduced, more intake of food, hyperglycemia, and obesity. Now we have got 1 primarily beta cell, 2 alpha cell glucagon increase, 3 the peripheral utilization, 4 hepatic glucose output, 5 lipotoxicity and adipose tissue related free fatty acids, and 6 the incretins, 7 the SGLT role of the excretion at the renal level, and 8 at the level of hypothalamus. This is called the octet of diabetes pathogenesis. The octet means 8 different mechanisms. This you remember. Now, why do I want to know this? Because I have mechanisms of interfering with the one or more of these eight. That is where the treatment starts. Okay, this is called the today it is called the omnious octet, omnious dangerous, omnious octet. Okay. Now that is about the paradigm shift in the understanding of diabetes, and now paradigm shift in the treatment strategy. This slide is the crux of diabetes preservation. Whenever you concentrate on this slide, you have understood around 25% of diabetes. So this is the onset of diabetes here. That is the point where you diagnose diabetes. Before that, it is called impaired glucose tolerance or impaired fasting glucose or pre-diabetes. And after that, frank diabetes on that. There will be a period of 4 to 7 years of impaired glucose tolerance before the patient is defined as diabetes as per the today's norms. What will happen? The first thing that happens is in the pre-diabetic stage itself, there is insulin resistance building up, and that goes and then flattens in the diabetic phase. That is the first thing. Second thing, what happens is insulin levels. Initially, there is hyperinsulinemia and then hypoinsulinemia. That is why at the time of diabetes, there will be maximum hyperinsulinemia, and that is not able to manage the hyperglycemia. Okay. Then you have the beta cell function. The beta cell function is to start with around 80% or 90% here. And then by the time of 10 years of diabetes, it is nearing 0%. This is what is called beta cell apoptosis. At the time of diagnosis, 50% of the beta cells are already apoptic. That means functionally not useful. Okay. So that is what you have to understand. First one is the insulin resistance. Second one is the hyperinsulinemia. Third one is the beta cell function. And then you have the hepatic glucose production. In the in the first stage, hepatic glucose production is not there very much. That is why you don't see much of fasting hyperglycemia at the time of diagnosis. This starts occurring and peaks by around 10 years. And that is important as a factor, and we need to control it. Now, we have got the blood test now. Postprandial glucose is the first one to rise, and that will be followed by the fasting hyperglycemia. So, these are the various stages of diabetes, and starting from the insulin resistance, insulin levels, that is hyperinsulinemia, beta cell dysfunction, HGP, hepatic glucose production, postprandial glucose, and fasting blood glucose. Then how about the complications? Now, the development of macrovascular complications starts right in the pre-diabetic state. That is the reason we need to address the pre-diabetic state and treat that pre-diabetic state also. The microvascular complications, of course, we know once the diagnosis of diabetes is there, the microvascular complications. What are microvascular complications? The retinopathy, the nephropathy, the neuropathy, and these are the macrovascular, atherosclerotic vascular disease, CAD, CVD, PADs, all the, and then renovascular disease, all are macrovascular complications. So this is called the tickling clock hypothesis. So this slide is, all of you have a mental picture of this slide. You will be able to understand how to treat and manage diabetes. Okay. Earlier days, this is what is called the step care approach, where mean HbA1c is around 8, and you have diet and exercise, try for some time, then oral anti-diabetic drugs monotherapy, then increase their dose, then use the combination, then add insulin, and finally multiple insulins. This was the norm. This was the conventional treatment. It is no more tenable as on date. What we need to do now? Then we have to have the proactive treatment now. And what is that proactive treatment? Now you see. So we are bringing all of them together to start, hit early and see, because the first 10 years of diabetes control is very important. Diet and exercise, monotherapy, escalated dose, combined therapy, up titration, and then basal insulin, and then probably the multiple injections. This is when the HbA1c is around. More than 7% hemoglobin, HbA1c or less or more, it is not uniform for all. This is the latest understanding in the last 7-8 years. This is in vogue. That means if the patient has got risk for hypoglycemia and other events, I will not reduce it to 7 and then be more stringent. This is there. You have to be very careful. Less stringent, that means you can use this particular treatment to bring down the HbA1c to more. Disease duration, newly diagnosed, you bring it below 7. And if it is very long standing, don't try to very much bring it below 7. Keep it around 7 or more. The life expectancy is long. That means the fellow is 30 or 40 years. You be very strict. And when he is not very short, 75, 80 years, then you don't be very stringent with the HbA1c. You relax to 7.5 or even 8. So there is no hard and fast rule. You have to aim for the 7. 7 is the balance, we know. But depending on the risks, if the risks are potential risks are associated, other drug events are not there, then you be very stringent. No, you have to add here. No. Whereas here, you have to be more stringent if these risk factors are there. Duration is sort of more, then you have to be long-standing duration, less stringent, or keep HbA1c more than 7. Newly diagnosed, keep the A1c less than 7. Life expectancy, long life expectancy, aim to keep less than 7. Short life expectancy, go. Important comorbidities like cardiovascular, they're absent, you go here. And then you use a more stringent approach. When they're there, go for the less stringent approach. Established vascular complications absent, more stringent. They're present, be less stringent. Patient attitude and expectation, highly motivated, wants to follow, does sugar monitoring very closely, be more stringent. Not able to do that, be less stringent. And finally, the most important in real world is, are we having the resources, the modern SGLTs, DPP4s, costly treatments? Can he do that? If the answer is yes, then you use them. Otherwise, bank on your older treatment. This slide is a very great eye opener for the entire treatment community of physicians who are treating diabetes, because now we have got 7 different factors which decide how intense will be my reduction of HbA1c in a given patient. Okay, so this you understand. Next one, the treatment now, the ominous octet, the 8 are there. So for the pancreas, I have got the sulfonylureas and then GLP-1 receptor antagonist and DPP-4s working on the pancreas. For the glucagon, I have the GLP-1 RAs and the DPP-4s. For the hepatic glucose output, I have the metformin, the isoladin, and the DPP-4, and then the GLP-1 antagonist. And then if it is, sorry, if it is the neurotransmitter dysfunction, then I have GLP-1. If it is the muscle uptake problem, I have the triazolidine. If it is the glucose reabsorption at the renal level, I have the SGLT. And if it is from the fat lipolysis, I have thiazolidine. If it is the gut incretin effect, we have the alpha glucosidase and the GLP-1 receptor antagonist. See now, depending on which organ the dysfunction you wanted to address, you can use various combinations. This is the treatment based on the pathogenesis or pathology. Now let us translate into clinical thing. Okay, pancreas, insulin secretion, sulfonylurea, meglitinide, DPP4. Muscle and liver, insulin resistance, bigonides, metformin, and then the thiazolidins. Renal level, decrease the renal reabsorption, use SGLT inhibitors. Alpha glucosidase inhibitors decrease the absorption at the level of the gut. And then on the liver, HGO, hepatic glucose overproduction, bigonides, DPP4s, and thiazolidins. All of them will reduce blood sugar. So this is the approach of the omnious octet based on the organ, the drug that you choose. Okay, when you use monotherapy with what? Monotherapy with metformin. Metformin is the sheet anchor. That is the baseline drug. And then the metformin is the drug of choice. The dual therapy combined with sulfonylurea, early diabetes, young diabetic, people who are obese. Metformin with thiazolidine, people who have insulin resistance more. DPP4s, weight neutral, SGLT, weight reducing. These are weight reducing, and also basal insulin if it is more than 9. To start with basal bolus like that you have to give. Now you see our drug, sitagliptin and other gliptins, they have 3 levels of action. At the level of the pancreas, they decrease the insulin, they decrease the glucagon and increase the insulin production. At the level of the beta cells, the function increases by insulin synthesis and insulin release. So they increase the intact GLP-1 levels, and sitagliptin reduces the hepatic glucose output through suppression of the glucagon from the alpha cells. Metformin increases the total GLP-1 levels, insulin sensitizing properties on the liver more compared to the muscle, thiazolidins on the muscle more compared to the liver. Metformin decreases the hepatic glucose output by targeting the liver to decrease the gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis. So here is a combination of metformin and sitagliptin, which are complementary to each other in their actions, and probably that should be the first choice if the patient has to be given a combination treatment, and provided he is affordable to buy the DPP4s. Okay, incretins in DPP4 inhibition, today's subject. Now you see insulin secretion, incretin. Increment in the insulin secretion is incretin. Okay. Now 1902 itself they started knowing, and by 1995 we have the DPP4s ready in the market to be used. Now how do they act? Already summarized by Raviteja, GLP-1 and GIPs. GLP-1 is the GIP and GLP-1. There are the two incretins that are there. The point is they stimulate the insulin release and inhibit the glucagon release. Net effect is lower the blood sugar. And they are inactivated by an enzyme called the DPP4, a class of DPP enzymes, dipeptyl peptidase enzymes. And then when that inactivates, this particular drug inactivates the enzyme. These are available for a longer time to act and lower the blood sugar. Okay. Oral glucose. How did we know the incretin effect? When we give oral glucose, more insulin release than IV glucose. That means giving through the mouth has an additional effect or giving through the glucose through the IV. This is how it has been studied. You see here, non-diabetics, oral this is the insulin curve, release of insulin. Intravenous, this is the curve. There's a whole huge difference in the amount of insulin secreted when you give orally. Likewise, in diabetics also the difference is maintained, but diabetics we know there is a delay in the insulin secretion. The early peak is missing. This is missing here. And that's the only difference. Otherwise, both had a benefit. And that is why these drugs are in place. Now you see, there is a meal, intestinal GIP and GLP are released, and 1 to 1 and 42, the amino acids, and the 7 to 36 amino acids. GLP, they are intact. GIP and GLP actions are there. But there is an enzyme which is rapidly inactivating it in about a matter of 2 to 5 minutes. This is the DPP4 enzyme. Then the amino acids are cleaved and their two amino acids are cut off by the DPP4 enzyme, and their metabolites are not active, and the GLP-1 and GIP are made inactive. Now we wanted to interfere with this enzyme and then produce a treatment effect. This has been shown by him very clearly. This is very nice. These are from the L cell. These are from the K cells. This stimulates the insulin. This also stimulates. This inhibits the glucagon. No effect on glucagon. This inhibits the gastric emptying. No effect on gastric emptying. And reduces food intake and body weight. No significant effect on food intake and body weight. They are neutral here. GIPs are neutral. GLP-1 is favorable. So again, you see there is an adenyl cyclase enzyme in the K cells. There is also the L cells, and these K cells are the L cells are in the ileum, and the K cells are in the duodenum. Okay, and then this produces GIP, this produces GLP. Both of them work on the pancreatic beta cell, and adenyl cyclase stimulated cyclic AMP is released. This makes the insulin granules available for secretion into the blood, that is insulin secretion. Okay, and this also this doesn't inhibit gastric emptying, this inhibits gastric emptying, and also satiety reduces body weight. This is what we have seen in the previous slide, diagrammatically represented. Ultimate effect is improved glucose tolerance and decrease in the weight or weight neutrality. Okay, what are these DPP4s? DPP4s are a class of enzymes like this 4, 6, 9, and then and of which we are using this DPP4 as our this one. So what? So a person has taken food, active GIP is produced or active GLP is produced. GIP is that purple color, GLP is that green color. They act on the both act on the beta cell, but this selectively acts on the alpha cell and decreases the glucagon production. They both increase the glucose independent insulin secretion. And this has an effect on the adipose tissue, peripheral utilization, and also the reduction in the FPG and PPBG, and also on the hepatic glucose production. 1, 2, 3 peripheral effects, and 1 and 2 central effects are possible. This enzyme DPP4 inactivates it. Now our inhibitor, the prototype sitagliptin, and then these are normally made inactive. The amino acid is cut off, they're made inactive. But if the enzyme is blocking it, they're available for a longer time to produce all these beneficial effects. Okay, what are the clinical profiles of gliptin? So what you do is, you have in this study, they have done a screening, then used metformin monotherapy as the run-in, single-blind placebo-controlled trial. On the day 1 randomization, put them on to 20 milligrams of glipizide or sitagliptin. Okay, 52 weeks. Glipizide is a sulfonylurea and sitagliptin. The comparison is both did equally well in terms of HbA1c reduction at the 52 weeks of endpoint. Okay, how about the effect? Is it sustained over the period of time? This is what is called non-inferiority to sulfonylurea, which was the standard drug for diabetes to bring down the oral drug to bring down the HbA1c. Now, when we have the 104 weeks follow-up, similar is the pattern. There is nothing much to separate sitagliptin from sulfonylurea metformin combination. This is a sitagliptin metformin. This is a sulfonylurea metformin combination. Remember, always metformin is the base. On the metformin only, these are the add-on drugs. We don't try separately sulfonylureas. Now there is a case for sitagliptins and other gliptins to try as monotherapy itself in patients who cannot be given metformin, like those who are having lactic acidosis, those who are very elderly, and in such cases you can try these gliptins as a monotherapy also. Now this is another trial where this is the randomization, there is a screening period, double-blind placebo 2 weeks, then sitagliptin or metformin. Previous one was metformin is the base, sitagliptin and glipizide as compared, and the endpoint is 24 weeks. Here metformin versus sitagliptin. So metformin reduces HbA1c, sitagliptin, this is yes, this is M. This reduction is a little more compared to this, but this is not statistically significant. That means both are good drugs in reducing the HbA1c at 24 weeks of trial. Then the combination therapy of sitagliptin with metformin, evidence is now there. This combination is the most important combination because they have complementary mechanisms of action. Metformin doesn't do anything to the insulin secretion in the pancreas. It doesn't really tackle much of the insulin secretion part. Whereas this attacks the alpha cell as well as the beta cell, reduces the activity of the alpha cell, increases the activity of the beta cell. Insulin is produced, glucagon is reduced. Peripheral effect, hepatic glucose here, and then the sensitization of the peripheral tissue. So, combine sitagliptin and metformin for the treatment of diabetes is very plausible and correct. Over 15 years of post-marketing experience, 84 million prescriptions, 20,000 patients in clinical trials, approved in 107 countries. The leading gliptin, sitagliptin, has all the advantages. Like, as has been pointed out in Ravi Teja's presentation, non-hypoglycemia, weight neutral, BP favorable, and then lipid neutral, renoprotective. And these are all the good. And then peripheral utilization is also affected reduction in the fasting glucose, reduction in the postprandial glucose, total reduction in the HbA1c, and most importantly, every diabetic drug must be cardiovascular safe. And that also, at least these are, though they are not protecting the heart, they are cardiovascular neutral. They do not cause any harm. That has to be established. Safety of the gliptins already has been presented by Ravi Teja very well. And mostly when we have the caution here is renal impairment. In case of renal impairment, most of the gliptins, we have to reduce the dose to half the dose. Whereas in hepatic impairment, only certain things are permissible. And choice of gliptin as a OHA also we will see. Safety here, sitagliptin usual care and sitagliptin placebo plus usual care. Usual care, whatever the patient is getting, they are getting. For the cardiovascular disease, plus sitagliptin is added in one limb and it is not added in the placebo limb. 1300 patients are tried and this is called very world famous TACOS trial. This is the cardiovascular safety endpoint trial. And from then onwards, the FDA started issuing a guide that every diabetic drug must pass the test of cardiovascular safety. Means either it should be protective or cardiovascular neutral. Because the purpose, and this is the effect of the sitagliptin you add, same line you can see, both in terms of events and in terms of mortality. Both of them are there. Hospitalizations for heart failure, intention to treat, placebo is that is the curve, and you add the sitagliptin, slight increase and not very significant increase. So about 20% of adults with diabetes have moderate to severe renal impairment. This we have to remember because in clinical practice, we have the EGFR less than 60 patients will be there. In such scenario, you have to make some dose adjustment. Now, what is EGFR? More than 90 is stage 1, 60 to 89 is stage 2 CKD, and 90 to 30 to 59 is stage 3, and 15 to 29 is stage 4, and less than 15 is stage 5. 4 and 5 are called the renal replacement stages, and fifth stage is called the ESRD, and stage renal disease. And this is the CKD staging as per the KDOQI CKD study staging. The first stage is proteinuria is there, but still the GFR is above 90. Second stage is the GFR is already reduced. And third stage is GFR is further reduced. Fourth stage is it here, and fifth stage is less than 15. So we have to evaluate every diabetic patient for the CKD. Depending on that, we have to use the drug. If we are considering DPP4s, we have to make the adjustment of the dose. How to calculate the EGFR? Using the MDRD equation. You don't have to worry about all the calculation. Their calculators are available. Just put the creatinine, age, gender, and ethnicity, and automatically you get the EGFR. without working on the EGFR do not depend on the creatinine alone. So the guidelines for the appropriate choice of type 2 diabetes patients with renal impairment, as has been pointed out, whenever there is a reduction in the EGFR, dose halving from 100 milligrams of sitagliptin to 50 milligrams, and then probably further down 25 milligrams in the ESRD. Likewise, other gliptins also. So the half-life and eliminations, Seta is a prolonged half-life. You can use once, whereas when you want to use vildagliptin, which is very common used in India, at least you have to give twice. Remember, allogliptin once a day, and then the linagliptin once a day. Vilda and Saxa, probably we have to give twice a day. So normal renal function 100, 100, then 50, 25, 25, already highlighted by the previous speaker. And then the hypoglycemia in patients with type 2 diabetes. You see here, this is the hypoglycemia here. This is with the glycoside or glypizide. Glypizide, of course, is a sulfonylurea. Insulin and sulfonylureas are notorious to cause hypoglycemia, whereas SGLTs, DPP4 inhibitors, metformin are not supposed to cause hypoglycemia. That is what is demonstrated here. And symptomatic hypoglycemia, 6.2% of people versus 17% of the people. This is the mean body weight change. This is not hypoglycemia, change in the body weight. Reduction here, this increase the weight. This is the chart on the hypoglycemia. Okay, hypoglycemic, this I avoid. And then finally, what is the summary or take home points? Incretins are rapidly degraded by an enzyme called the DPP4. Inhibition of this enzyme increases the concentration of these active incretins, thereby increasing the insulin release and decreasing the circulating glucagon levels in a glucose dependent manner. This occurs only when there is food and glucose. This effect is not there when the food is not there. Is that not very useful? If you do not have the food, then there is no excess insulin production. That is why there is no hypoglycemia. Okay, unlike sulfonylureas, whether food or no food, they go on pressing the beta cells and produce hypoglycemia. Sitagliptin has a favorable pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic profile. Sitagliptin monotherapy or combination with metformin provides a substantial and statistically significant glucose-lowering efficacy. When I say sitagliptin, it holds good for the class of gliptins, all the gliptins. There are minor differences which we have already seen in terms of their renal protection, in terms of their hepatic dysfunction safety, in terms of their sort of half-life, in terms of their cytochrome type of enzymes and all that. Sitagliptin has an established safety profile based on pooled safety analysis of 25 clinical trials and a cardiovascular safety trial, the TECOS trial. Okay, now this is what something like what Raviteja has told. Once daily, this must be given twice daily, once daily, once daily. Here is one gliptin, which is half-life is shorter, so much you have to use twice daily. Monotherapy, metformin intolerant persons, all can be used except this one. Add on to metformin, everything is useful. Add on to sulfonylurea, not linagliptin, but others. Add on to thiazolidines, again not linagliptin. Triple treatment, metformin, sulfonylurea, and DPP4, all except probably not substantiated for allogliptin. Triple with metformin and thiazolidine. Here it is sulfonylurea, here it is triazolidine in the triple therapy, not, not recommended for these drugs and useful for the other two gliptins here. So add on to insulin. What will be my role adding on to insulin? Yes, these can be combined with insulin. So here is a drug. This is a group of drugs or a class of drugs which can be used as monotherapy in metformin intolerant and contraindicated, can be added on to metformin, can be added on to sulfonylureas, can be added on to thiazolidines, can be a combined treatment with sulfonylurea metformin, can be a combined treatment with metformin and thiazolidine, and can be added on to insulin also. 3 gliptins and these two. Barring that, the general chart is the same, isn't it? So sitagliptin, mild to moderate hepatic impairment, it can be given. Severe hepatic impairment, we have no clinical experience. Mild to moderate renal impairment, you give. Severe, you give with a dose reduction, and stage even further reduction. And although, of course, you have the elderly people, no confusion here, because certain antidiabetic drugs we cannot give in the elderly. And here are drugs which are useful in the elderly also, and the long standing also. They don't depend very much on the duration of diabetes. Of course, the insulin release is a mechanism there, but there are other mechanisms also. So that is why these drugs are very useful. So sitagliptin or a class of gliptins are as an initial therapy in appropriate patients, combination therapy with metformin, combination with thiazolidine, combination with metformin and sulfonylurea, combination with sulfonylurea, combination with thiazolidine, combination with insulin, combination with the other two drugs, and finally insulin, metformin, and DPP4 you can use. And of course, the cornerstone of treatment is diet and exercise. So these are all the various advantages of DPP4s, and that is a thank you for this presentation. I think certain slides you were not able to see. I understood a little later. I will just go through one or two of those important slides. Yeah, this I think you have seen. Yeah, this is the slide which you saw, and this is a very important slide. The incretin effect, active GIP, active GLP acting on the beta cells, the GIP and the GLP acting on both beta and alpha cells, and insulin dependent glucose is increased, glucagon is decreased, and then you have the peripheral utilization, hepatic glucose, and the enzyme inactivation also you know, and then that is where we block it. This part, I think, the trials I have, there is an equipotency between sulfonylurea with combination with metformin in this trial, and also sulfonylurea metformin combination over 104 weeks also, 52 weeks and 104 weeks, both. And this is sitagliptin versus metformin, very sort of plus, I mean, head-to-head comparisons at 24 weeks. There is no non-inferiority. Both of them reduced HbA1c. And then you have metformins, the complementary mechanism of action, they can be combined. This drug is tried over several patients, several clinical trials, and DPP4s are very safe. Safety profiles of gliptin, gliptin with usual care and tacos trial, and sitagliptin placebo with usual care. And the endpoints are there are no difference in the cardiovascular events. And this is one trial which proved that cardiovascular safety, at least cardiovascular neutrality. Endpoints here you see, that is the placebo line, and you see the sitagliptin line. Both are same. There is no inferiority, non-inferiority or of this particular drug in terms of cardiovascular safety. Likewise, hospitalizations also not statistically significant. So this is where we have, I think all these slides you have seen, and I end the presentation here. Okay. Any doubts you have? Anybody here? Raviteja?
Sir.
Any additional insights you got from the presentation than what you presented?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the omnious octet concept you have to understand. Okay,
Yes,
there are 8 different mechanisms, pathogenic mechanisms causing diabetes. Okay, and how we address each of the 8 problems by different drugs. We have several drugs, a combinations of sulfonylureas, so of course start with metformin, thiazolidines, and then DPP4s, GIP1 analogs, and then insulin, sulfonylureas, metaglenide, repaglenide, and use a combination of these things. And I again go back and tell you, when you want to tailor the treatment of a diabetic patient, you always go and then look at this particular chart. This is a very useful guide for all of you to go and look for how much you reduce the HbA. There are 7 parameters. Are there risk factors in this patient? They are not there. Is he a newly diagnosed? Is he a young fellow? Are there no comorbidities? No established vascular disease? Very good attitude and has resources. Then bring down the A1C below 7. Just the other way around. Has many risk factors, long-standing diabetes, short life expectancy, severe comorbidities, established cardiovascular disease, less motivated to get good control, limited resources, go above 7. This is a very important shift in the treatment, paradigm shift in the treatment of diabetes. Did you get this?
Yes, sir.
You should not think that everybody I wanted to keep 7 or 6.9. Depending on the patient profile, there are 7 variables given, and use the variables there and titrate your A1C around 7 or less than 7 or more than 7. And then only the patient will not have hypoglycemia and other complications of treatment, right? The omnious octet concept, the A1C titration concept, and the multiple mechanisms that are involved in this all are important. And every diabetic drug, you have to ask the following questions. Is it weight neutral? Is it not producing hypoglycemia? Is it cardioprotective? Is it renoprotective? What is its effect on blood pressure? What is its effect on lipids? And how does it do in renal dysfunction and hepatic dysfunction? Because a diabetic patient is going to have a combination of these problems, right? He is not coming exclusively for diabetes. He will have other comorbidities like renal dysfunction, cardiovascular problem, hepatic dysfunction, and also he may be obese, he may be lean, he may be having history of severe hypoglycemic attacks. For example, if a patient with severe history of severe recurrent hypoglycemic attacks, I will remove the sulfonylurea. I will not put him. If he is on, we will remove and avoid insulin. If the patient is overweight, avoid insulin, avoid sulfonylurea. The patient is thin, probably you can use. Early diabetes, sulfonylureas have a role because the beta cells are still functioning. By the time the diagnosis is made, 50% of the beta cells are gone, but sulfonylureas work through the beta cells. So how can I give them in people who have long-standing diabetes? In long-standing diabetes, metformin, thiazolidine, DPP-4s, and of course insulin. Okay. So depending on what type of patient, is he a lean diabetic or is he an obese diabetic? Is he a hypertensive diabetic? Is he a normotensive diabetic? Is he a dyslipidemic fellow? Is he an elderly person? Does he have other comorbidities? Everything decides the drugs that I choose for the treatment. Isn't it? Any PGs who wanted to add or discuss or substantiate further? Any DNB students here? Dr. Sujit sir is there? This is somebody Sivarazu Kanugula. Deepa?
Sir, regarding teneligliptin, sir,
Teneligliptin is almost like sitagliptin only. Teneligliptin, the advantage is it is cheaper compared to other drugs. Teneligliptin is once a dose, can be combined with metformin. It is a cardiovascular safety is assessed, and also it is weight neutral. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Gliptins as a class are weight neutral. And it only vildagliptin you need to give twice.
Okay, sir.
In renal impairment also, teneligliptin can be given just like sitagliptin, but with a reduced dose. Any other thing you have any doubts? Senior PGs, exam going PGs? I will share this presentation with all of you. Go through the slides. These are sort of state-of-the-art slides on the omnious octet and the HbA1c titration depending on the profile of the patient. There are 7 variables to decide the profile of the patient and then reduce the HbA1c. Same treatment does not work for everyone. You have to individualize and then tailor the treatment to the type of patient you are having. Of course, affordability is one of the important variables. In a person who cannot afford any of these modern drugs, again, cheaper metformin and sulfonylurea only will go. Sulfonylurea, the problem is they will be pressing the beta cell and then trying to force insulin release. Already the beta cell is overstressed in a diabetic patient. So try to avoid the glibenclamide and then the older generation sulfonylurea, because glibenclamide is a powerful constant beta cell stimulator, whereas glyclazide, glipizide, and glimepiride are not that bad in terms of hypoglycemia. So the best drug probably among the three is glyclazide, then glimepiride, then glipizide in that order. In that order, as far as the beta cell function is concerned, the safety of using this drug. And worst will be the glibenclamide, so-called Dionyl or euglucon, which is the poor man's anti-diabetic drug. Suppose nothing is he can afford, then of course he has to rely on diet and also the sulfonylurea. And one good reason to think not to give sulfonylurea is patient who is already 10 years or more diabetic, avoid sulfonylurea. And also patient who has got recurring hypoglycemia and who is already sort of obese, don't try to put them on sulfonylurea. In a way, I tried to cover the entire spectrum of diabetes treatment, keeping DPP4 as the central point. Other aspects also are explained. The other day we have discussed SGLT inhibitors. So together they make up a very good modern management of diabetes. If you can afford, these SGLT inhibitors, DPP4 along with metformin will be as good as giving insulin. And I also told you that a patient who has got above 9 HbA1c to start with, you have to give an initial early insulin therapy. For how many weeks? 6 to 12 weeks. By then, the hyperglycemia is corrected, then insulin may be reduced, other drugs can take over. And we know the legacy effect. First 10